Hi, I'd like to welcome Heather Lally from FDR Law, an associate solicitor dealing in private client work. Thanks for joining us today, Heather.
Thanks, Jonathan.
Um, Big tough time for lots of issues that's going on. So can I ask, during lockdown, if people are considering a will or reviewing a will, or what to do, how do they go about it?
Well, obviously, in lockdown, the usual office meetings can't take place as they would have done normally, and home visit meetings don't take place as normal. That doesn't mean that we can't still see people virtually by way of the advances in technology to be able to carry out those meetings, whether by telephone or FaceTime or video conferencing. We can still run those meetings. The important thing for us is to make sure that we run the necessary identification checks first so that we know who the client is. We understand who it is that is actually instructing us in relation to that meeting. So it is the client itself that we are going to be speaking to. We need to just check if that person who's wanting to give us instructions is in the house on their own, or whether they are just with their spouse or civil partner, or if there are other family members that are going to be around in the house. If so, we need to make sure that they can go into a separate room, away from listening ears, so to speak, to make sure that there's no undue influence going on. Nobody's trying to, make them make a will in certain respects. And the other important thing for us to consider is to make sure that that person has capacity, obviously, to give us instructions. So we still need to carry out our assessments of capacity in relation to will instructions. So it's very important for solicitors like myself and other will preparers to make sure that we do make full attendance notes as to exactly how those instructions were taken during lockdown.
Right. So when you've got the instructions, how do people get those draft documents to review them?
Well, it's entirely up to the client. If they are happy with documents to be emailed to them by PDF format, we can do that. As the offices are operating under skeleton staff at the moment, following strict government guidelines, incorporating the social distancing of 2 meters apart, if people still require the hard copy of the documents, we can get those documents sent out to them in the post as well.
Right. So when the will is approved, how do people then go about getting it witnessed in the current situation that we've got at the moment with the 2 meter rule and everything?
Yeah, it's a bit more difficult, isn't it, than in normal circumstances where you would just come to the office to get it signed up. But it's still possible. A lot of people are adopting asking neighbours, and by doing that maybe over a garden wall or by way of a car bonnet. The important thing is to make sure that we have that social distancing of the 2 meters, and people potentially can wear their own gloves if necessary, have their own black pens to hand. The important thing to remember is that we need at least 2 witnesses to witness a will, and at the moment there's been no relaxation of those laws. It's still that those 2 witnesses need to be present during the whole time that the will is witnessed. We have to also think about who the witnesses are going to be. They have to be over the age of 18. They shouldn't be an executor of the will or a beneficiary of the will, and they should be independent, so it shouldn't be a spouse or partner or relative of the person. There has been no relaxation in terms of, you can't witness a will by way of video conferencing at the moment. But if people are suffering, with what's going on at the moment, or having difficulties in getting witnesses to them, we can obviously still provide independent witnesses to that person following the strict social distancing rules. Obviously, our witnesses would have to come in separate cars, and it's likely to be, through a window or through the garden. It needs to make sure that the witnesses actually are in line of the sight of the person who's signing the will. It's also potentially something that people could consider if you are being asked to be a witness to a will, to either write a declaration or a letter that can be dated, signed, just explaining where you stood, what happened, who was there when that will was witnessed, just to potentially avoid any potential challenges to that will in due course.
Great. So ultimately, if the worst happens, as we see the death toll increasing, what do people need to do to access a will or deal with the estate?
Well, the first thing they need to do is notify the person who is actually holding the will. So if that's a solicitor's firm, let the solicitors know. What we will do is we'll run the necessary checks to make sure that we know who's been appointed as the executors and trustees, because they are the people who are actually entitled to deal with the estate and receive any information with regards to it. I think the important thing to remember during lockdown is that there may be more than one executor that's been appointed, and all of the executors have to agree as to who that will is going to be released to. The will won't be released until a death certificate has been produced. And again, during lockdown, we have seen some delays with regards to probate registries in particular areas getting death certificates out. And that may be also due to kind of the postal system in certain areas as well. But once the death certificate has been obtained and the executors are in agreement as to who that will is to be released to, then obviously we can release that if necessary. If clients want assistance in terms of dealing with the estate, we can provide advice in relation to that. I think the important thing is to make sure that executors do still take the advice and have that initial conversation. A solicitor will always tell you if it's a straightforward estate and you can deal with it yourself, but it's much easier to have that initial conversation and take the advice rather than find yourself subject to a claim or court proceedings if you try and do things yourself and haven't taken that advice to start with.
Heather, marvellous advice. Thank you very much. Way over time, I'm afraid. I've had a 5-minute interview, but well worth it because this is vitally important, this subject. So thanks very much for joining us today.
Thanks, Jonathan.